Zebra Family channel. If you have not subscribed, please click the like button, share and subscribe. It's free.
Nothing has changed between the West and Africa in basically a millennium. I mean, the relationship was ruthlessly extractive 800 years ago, and it's ruthlessly extractive now. And you can't help but recognize that keeping things this way simply must not only be important to the West, but literally it must be the most important thing to the West. It's so important to them that they have always maintained this status quo no matter what else changes in the world. Wallahi, they're dedicated to the subjugation and the exploitation of Africa more than they're dedicated to anything else. Everything else is allowed to change except for this. This must never change. And it's not difficult to see why. I mean, it's the subjugation and the exploitation of Africa that has enabled the West to impersonate a superior civilization. That he's some sort of an aristocrat or a monarch or something. Well, he needs to have some kind of a display of a monarch's wealth in order to be convincing. And that's been the whole basis for what the West claims about itself being superior. The whole basis has always been that they're materially successful. So, okay, today you have iPhones and technology, you have a high standard of living and so forth. So that means that you must be better. You must be more intelligent. You must be more evolved. You must be more civilized, more advanced than the rest of us. I mean, look how nice their places are. See how much better their stuff is. Well, this is all reliant upon the vicious pillage and plunder of Africa. Without this subjugation, without this exploitation of Africa, Europe and the West would be nothing but crude, emaciated serfs, barely producing enough to survive. Their wealth was primarily derived from theft and plunder, from piracy and slavery, from mass murder and crime. This is just a historical reality. Because of the subjugation of Africa, first through chattel slavery, the extraction of Africa's human resources, and now through the extraction of natural resources, the West has been able to maintain this artificial, unearned status as a so-called civilization, keeping Africa subject, subordinate, suppressed, and impoverished is an existential need for the West. It's the only way that they can keep up the pretense of their supremacy. Because again, the pretense of their supremacy has never been based upon any actual advancement, any actual sophistication, any actual moral or intellectual development. It has always been based on the violent accumulation of wealth and resources, upon brute power, deceit, and conniving. And Africa, the subjugation of Africa, is the most vital necessity for keeping this con going. I mean, right now, the trade relationship between the West and Africa is that something like 70% of exports to Africa from the West are manufactured goods, and imports from Africa are just the raw materials used to make those manufactured goods. So they're taking from Africa what is needed in order to produce goods that then Africa buys from the West, made with their own raw materials. And the West has done everything possible to try to impede Africa's ability to build its own manufacturing base so that they could potentially use their own raw materials, use their own raw minerals to produce their own goods. I mean, the whole process should be done in-house. It should all be done in Africa. That's what makes sense. You know, you have the materials, you have the minerals, you can make the products. That's how it should be. Rather than giving your raw natural resources to the West, for them to manufacture and refine and process and so on, Africa could do all of those things themselves. I mean, imagine the impact that would have. Where would that leave the West then? Well, they know that. The West knows that. They're acutely aware of their actual total dependence upon Africa. If Africa manufactured, if they used their own resources, their own minerals, their own materials for their own industries, well, the entire economy of the West would collapse. And with the collapse of the economy, their whole so-called civilization would collapse. Africa is the foundation upon which they built their house. So they know this. And like I said, this is why no matter what else changes in the world, no matter how power dynamics shift in the world, the subjugation of Africa has been maintained for over 800 years. There's literally nothing more important to them than this. And this is why there are very powerful factions in the West that want to destroy BRICS, and why they fearmonger about Chinese investment in Africa. Covert operations, regime change, regime infiltration projects all across the continent. I mean, look at South Africa, the ANC, either out of naivete or corruption, or naivete that devolved into corruption, or out of coercion, or some combination of all of these factors, the ANC collaborated with neoliberal programs for 30 years. I mean, to one degree or another, for the last 30 years. But as global power dynamics have been shifting, and the creation and the ascendancy of BRICS has been taking place, people have started to have aspirations. And more importantly, they've started to have options. And those options have made their aspirations actually achievable. I'm talking about aspirations of political independence, aspirations of economic sovereignty, aspirations of getting out from under the yoke of the West. That's actually becoming achievable now. So the ANC was facing, and they are facing, severe criticism and opposition. They were being challenged. And they were being challenged by parties that do not accept neoliberalism, neoliberal colonialism, corporate colonization. And the U.S. knew that eventually they were going to lose power. Eventually the ANC was going to face the consequences of capitulation and collaboration, and they were going to be removed and replaced. And if the U.S. didn't do something, then the replacement for the ANC was not going to be an obedient client. Because again, South Africa has the option now not to be an obedient client of the West. I mean, as long as there were no options, then it wasn't that risky for America. Even if the ANC lost popularity, no matter who replaced them, they would have no choice but to capitulate to neoliberalism because there was no options. But there are options now. So you have the United States then backing the so-called Democratic Alliance, the DA, which is an overtly neoliberal, Western-aligned, elitist political party of colonizer collaborators. So the unpopularity and the opposition to the ANC opened a space for the DA to move into the government in the last election. So now you have this so-called GNU, the Government of National Unity, which is nothing but a neoliberalism light and a neoliberalism hardcore. It's a coalition of one party that was aligned with the West, the ANC, aligned with the West out of coercion or naivete or corruption, but which could have potentially been influenced by anti-neoliberal popular sentiment if given a chance. Now they've joined together with a party that is intensely committed to colonization, intensely committed to neoliberalism. I mean, they want to privatize everything. They want everything to be sold off to the private sector. They want to hollow out the government completely. And you need this radical neoliberal colonizer faction to be there because as the new options have emerged, you've now had radical anti-neoliberal positions being advocated and becoming viable. I mean, you're actually having calls for the nationalization of industries rather than the privatization of state enterprises. Well, the West can't have that. So they need something like the DA, the Democratic Alliance, to move in to try to avert the threat of South Africa actually becoming politically independent and economically sovereign. You know, they call it the GNU, but the N shouldn't stand for national. It's the government of neoliberal unity. It's a coalition united against the people of South Africa, in my opinion, in service to the interests of the elite private sector of South Africa and to the global Western private sector. The DA is a racist, Zionist, anti-BRICS, pro-Western colonizer political party, funded at least in part by the National Endowment for Democracy in the United States, which is nothing but a wing of the CIA, whose sole mission is to advance American interests. So in South Africa, this was a regime infiltration project that was undertaken to actually avert regime change in South Africa. Organic regime change. Because look, you can nationalize the mining sector in South Africa. You can. You can nationalize the banking sector. You can nationalize the Reserve Bank. You can do all of these things and everyone knows it. It's not some kind of a mystery that these types of measures would be immensely empowering for South Africa. These aren't measures that we don't know whether they're useful and beneficial or not. Obviously they are, and tremendously so. And that's precisely why these types of policies, these types of measures have to be subverted. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous for anyone in South Africa today to advocate neoliberal policies when we have in front of our eyes the catastrophic failure of those policies. I mean, nearly half the population is unemployed, over half the population among the youth. 75% of South Africans earn just the equivalent of $350 a month or less. In fact, roughly half of the population earn only $75 a month. And you're still going to advocate for the policies that got you here? No, obviously. If you nationalize, it's better for you. Obviously. I mean, empower the government with those abundant resources instead of letting foreign companies seize those profits and transfer them out of the country. I mean, if those revenues are going to the state, then the government will have the resources they need to better address the needs of the society. They can invest in SMEs, they can provide education, skills training, and so on, fund R&D. I mean, it's a no-brainer. But you're scared of what the West will do. They tell you that if you nationalize, then there will be massive capital flight, investors will run away, and so on. Well, think about that for a second. They're trying to scare you with consequences that they themselves will be imposing. They're warning you that if you do something that is in your country's best interest, they will punish you. This is very different from telling you that the policy in and of itself is actually bad. They're telling you that they will make it a bad policy because of what they will do to you if you implement it. You understand? These people are threatening you, and then you're supposed to trust their advice? The advice of these neoliberal predators? You're supposed to listen to them and trust their advice when they are blatantly telling you that they will punish you if you do something to try to make things better, to try to change things? I mean, they couldn't make it more obvious, their malice. They couldn't make their malice more obvious. They couldn't make it any more obvious how against your best interests they are. How much they put their own private interests above the interests of their country. They're openly identifying themselves to you as your enemy. You understand me? I mean, they're not saying that nationalization doesn't work. They're not saying that it isn't beneficial. They're saying that they will do everything in their power that nationalization doesn't work. They're not saying that it isn't beneficial. They're saying that they will do everything in their power to make sure it doesn't work. They're saying that they will sabotage nationalization for their own sake, for the sake of their own profit interests. And still you let this type of people have a say in policy discourse? Well, that's humiliating. They hold you in contempt, and they don't even hide it. I'm telling you, everyone knows what should be done in a country like South Africa, what kind of economic policies they should implement. And it's the same thing that many global South countries should do. Everyone knows the obvious economic benefits of these types of policies. And everyone knows that the only reason that you don't implement these policies is because parasitic, predatory, Western colonizing private sector powers will try to punish you if you do. I mean, for instance, the nationalization of key sectors in South Africa or in any other country, such as mining, such as energy and finance. This is essential to try to break the stranglehold of foreign capital on your country, and to ensure that the country's resources are actually used for the benefit of the people and for the benefit of the domestic economy. Land reform, the question of land reform in South Africa is critical. This is a critical issue. There should be a comprehensive land reform program in South Africa that prioritizes the redistribution of land to the historically disadvantaged. This is basic, and it's incredibly obvious. And once you've boosted the state's resources through nationalization, there should be a comprehensive social welfare system that provides for the basic needs of all citizens, including healthcare, education, and housing. This is, again, obvious. And finally, the government, of course, needs to pursue a policy of industrialization and job creation, a policy that prioritizes the development of the domestic economy. And like I said before, prioritizes the manufacturing of goods from their own raw materials, from their own raw minerals and their resources, rather than the export of those minerals to Western companies for them to use in their manufacturing. Honestly, none of this requires any particular brilliance to understand. These aren't radical policies, but they're only made to seem radical, and they're treated as radical because everyone is living in fear of private sector tyrants who completely control the discourse. So you're not allowed to talk about anything that isn't basically a policy genuflection to shareholders and to Western supremacy. But everyone knows that these are good policies that would help South Africa, and that the only reason anyone would think that they might not be good for South Africa is because they know that doing a policy that's good for South Africa would prompt a hostile, retaliatory response from the West. Well, like I said, that should show you what kind of a friend the West is. But look, South Africa, and all the countries in Africa, all the countries in the global South, in fact, they're in a position today to actually dictate the terms now. If Westerners want to pull out their capital, so say you nationalize, okay, if Westerners want to pull out their capital, they want to withdraw their investments, okay, go ahead. Dig around in your own lands for the minerals you need to make your stuff, and good luck to you. I mean, we have other investors anyway who can take your place. There's other companies that we can partner with. You're not the only ones. So the only question really is, how much are you interested in boosting the economies of China, the economy of Russia, the economy of the Gulf? How much do you want to see the BRICS countries surpass you economically? You know, BRICS already accounts for more of global GDP than the G7. So if you want to pull out your investments, you pull them out. Go ahead. You can only harm yourselves. No. South Africa and the Muslim world and all the global South countries, it's time for them to break away from this paradigm, break away from Western domination and start implementing all of those policies that they know perfectly well will benefit them, whether America likes it or not. I mean, can you imagine if the Gulf countries didn't put their oil sector under government control? Where would they be now? But look at where they are now. Look at the amount of capital they have now. Why South Africa could have and should have a comparably massive sovereign wealth fund. There's no reason for them not to. No, this millennium-long system of subjugation needs to come to an end. And it really doesn't matter if the road to liberation is a little bit rocky. I'd rather be traversing a rocky road than be buried under the rubble, which is where the West has kept Africa for centuries. This is the richest and most important continent on the planet. And the West stole your riches and they stole your importance, and they've been an imposter on the throne for far too long. It doesn't make any sense to be afraid of someone whose power is actually dependent upon you. That's a psychological power, not an actual power. They have a psychological power over you. But every element of their real power is completely derived from you yourselves.
When the working class was suffering an intense crisis of capitalist socio-economic reproduction and what we characterize as the crisis of living of the working class. And we then said the crisis of living of the working class made the working class, the people, the majority in society, not to afford life itself. Because of the strength of capital that had almost overcome the ability of the leadership in government led by popular forces, the liberation movement. And we therefore said, let's embark on a mission to rescue this moment. It was not to be. We failed to rescue that moment. But we did, contributed to the fact that the Moonshot Pact that was established by capital, not just by capital, but by imperialist forces. And let me be very clear about this question, comrade, because we said when we addressed the January 8th of the ANC early this year, we said the following. We said, South Africa is suffering from twin threats of the National Democratic Revolution. Twin counter-revolutionary threats. One is international capital and capitalist system, its surrogates here, who believe that they can no longer make profit under the leadership of the African National Congress because the masses of our country are demanding more, and the ANC can no longer afford not to listen to the voices of the poor in this country. This is our analysis. We said it in public at a rally, let alone in commissions. I addressed one of your political commissions. I raised this question. It's an analysis, a class analysis, this question. Now, what capital then sought to do is to replace the ANC with someone that can guarantee them profitability in production, not production to meet social needs of the people. And it is in this regard that we have even highlighted how this particular Moonshot Pact was conceived and established. We have not hidden it. The media do not want to report about it. Okay, let's take, for example, the elections campaign. Because we are taking the role of the South African media in the Moonshot Pact, propping up the Moonshot Pact, and we are not saying That's the main reason why we lost election, but it also contributed because they created a single agenda in the country. And I hope, let me suggest, not hope, let me suggest, that let's print GS, now, for these delegates. The declaration of the Gdansk meeting in Poland. The declaration from a conference called Conference Against Totalitarianism and in Defense of Democracy, which was convened last year, June, in Poland. We've spoken about it in public, even when I addressed the big media forum with Comrade Solipitwe and Comrade Mbalula at the Hani Memorial. The media were all there with their cameras. And I spoke when they were still, their cameras were still on. I even spoke about names of collaborators of this international agenda in the name of defense of democracy and against totalitarianism. The European Solidarity Center that convened this meeting, working with the Brenthurst Foundation, led by Greg Mills, and senior journalists who attended this meeting, they may or they may not have known the agenda, but clearly they played the agenda, the role of that particular outcome of that particular meeting when they are back here in South Africa. Amongst them, for instance, prominent South Africans who participated, and those of you, including from this media institution, they've hosted no less than one or two of them, but multiple of them in the analysis pre-elections and post-election. For instance, the last minister, defense minister of apartheid regime, Rolf Meyer, was one of the attendees of this meeting in Gdansk. Yes, all of a sudden, Rolf Meyer was resurrected from somewhere to be a commentator, even on the concept of the GNU. Everywhere on television, SABC, ANC, everywhere. It's planned by those who are controlling the media houses. No problem, I have no problem at all against journalists. Because when a photographer or political reporter comes here, he's told by the editor what they want, or the political editor what they want from this meeting. They give them even questions what to ask. So Rolf Meyer was one of them. Dr. Ray Hartley, former editor, think of the Sunday Times and particularly of the Daily Dispatch, was one of them. The director at this Brenthurst Foundation. Dr. Mpumelelo Mkhabela, former editor of Sowetan, the Lovely People's Paper, was one of them. They were the main stars of the commentariat in the run-up to elections. Was this innocent? Then we have even there, president of the IFP, Hlabisa, was there in that meeting. There were others too. Yes. There were others too from here. The editor of the Daily Maverick was there. Now, these are reality. It's not science fiction. It's the reality of forces working against this revolution in the name of media freedom. Articulating one agenda, there must be change. The revolution has failed. There were several others. Comrade Lindy Zulu, as a fighter of our liberation movement, you'll know this. There was the leader of UNITA in that meeting from Angola. There was the leader of Renamo in that meeting from Mozambique. There was the leader of the MDC here, Tendai Biti, who after this year around March, April, I can't remember the exact date because of the campaign was too heavy, he came and addressed a seminar organized by the Daily Maverick in Cape Town. A newspaper we have said in public as the South African Communist Party that has been funded by the State Department of the US through the US consulate in Cape Town. We've never hidden this thing. We wrote it in our Umsebenzi online. They can't take us on because they know we have the proof. Now, a counter-revolution is unleashed on the revolutionary movement when we say we control levers of state power. We allow them to run havoc with us, with our revolution. Atsiko serious, my kawan. And the workers, they are going to suck you until your last drop. That is why it's in your best interest to fight. That's one element of how this thing was coordinated. This guy, Professor Kumete, who's the chairperson of the Moonshot Pact, a marketeer. What independence? So that's one element. Then there's other coordinations from the US. The Congress of the US attacks us. If you read the Congress of the US, Tinyiko, share that information with the GS here so that I can circulate it to the members. The Democrats and the Republicans in the US attacking South African government, punishing us. The writing was on the wall. So it was not something hidden. Yabona, the Communist Manifesto, I was glad Comrade Mbakse quoted it quite extensively. The issue is whether he was quoting it to justify the moment or to appreciate what has happened, something that we need to debate. The Communist Manifesto says, in the revolution, sometimes the battles, class battles, are sometimes hidden, sometimes open. We, as the revolutionary movement, the tools of analysis should assist us to understand when the class battles are underground, are hidden, so we can decode them, even when they are open. So this is one of our tasks. So the Brentest Foundation is owned by the Oppenheimer family. Now, the third document that I need you to be printed for is the fourth quarter of the political party funding of the IEC from the 29th of February until now, fourth quarter. ANC who funded who, it's public knowledge. It's not a hidden thing. Now, amongst that, for instance, is just to highlight for you, Mafra, because I was including money that. Yabana le party to Rise Mzansi. It's a new party of some so-called black intellectual, a former journalist, Uzonges Zibi, who established together our friends work or Michelle Prince, this thing called the Midrand Group. Black right-wing intellectuals. Even if they may come from the liberation movement, some of them, or may have been student activists. Now, Rise Mzansi registers almost over 30 million income in this fourth quarter. As in a single quarter, let alone in a year. See Communist Party. That's why they need our man to contest the liberation movement. Action SA gets about 32 million. A new party born last year. The ANC, there are many others. Bosa and them, they are funded by everyone else from this Oppenheimer group. Then ANC, our movement, gets 46 million. The DA gets 126 million. 1 quarter. Let's contest against capital. We said this in the campaign. Of course, you know most of our campaigns, these media people, they never covered us, particularly me. That's the truth. Throughout the campaign, I worked every single province, every single day. They never came. Because it was clear, because we were exposing also the agenda that they were carrying in the name of informing the public. No grudges. Never. Not at all. I'm not even a person of that particular space. But the point is, the writing was on the wall for this liberation movement. been attacked by forces of capital internationally and locally. Their stooges here are led by the DA, which coordinated all other parties to condemn and attack our liberation movement, given free airtime everywhere. The Gdansk meeting also takes in the declaration that is signed by these parties, also says they are imploring on international internet sites to use their algorithms to change perceptions against regimes that they characterize as totalitarian and in defense of democracy. So during this period of the elections, if you went into the internet and typed African National Congress, the first 10 stories will be stories about corruption, about poor service delivery, about every other wrong thing that African National Congress has done. It's configured by Google, Microsoft and others. And this new boy cannot be a girl. All bad things are brought by boys in general. This company called NVIDIA. Yeah. They came in, changed the perception. Configured by so-called liberal forces. They are so impatient. They are so intolerant. Everyone, even amongst themselves, they fight amongst themselves. That is why, for instance, even a rogue guy, the liberals. Here, you are fooled by liberals. I've got my notes, they're written, handwritten, President. Central Committee. I'm debating the state of liberalism.
Family, I want to talk about this professor. This professor was so brave that he showed a picture as to what really happened in our elections in South Africa. The collision of DA and ANC, it's not about the ANC trying to bring everybody and say they're doing a GNU. It is not a GNU, but it was supported somewhere else because they realized that DA is working with the outside forces. So working with the outside forces, it's very easy for them to agree on whatever terms that came up because they realized that if progressive, say for instance, if ANC picked MK or EFF, that would be the end of DA. So they realized that if DA is no more in politics, because it was going to shrink like nobody's business. So they realized that, okay, whatever deal puts up, the ANC put up, we have to go for it. No matter how hard is it. That is the reason why it will be too hard for DA to leave the collusion that they call it GNU when it's not really GNU. So there are so many factors in this so-called GNU. Why they are scared of EFF? Why they are scared of MKP? Why they are scared of ATM? It doesn't matter. ATM has got very few seats in parliament. But even that voice, it's so powerful. Why they are scared of EFF and MK? They know that the land will be taken and banks will be owned by the government of South Africa. So a lot of changes will come. So these big mafias that are controlling the country for now are going to lose power. And when they lose land, because land is everything. So kungako ke bebona ukuthi amabhunu agijime ahamba ayosizwa like Mapaila. When you listen to Solly Mapaila's, you realize that what Solly Mapaila is talking about, it's not a fiction. It's something that is there. So immediately they realized that ANC was losing power. They said, no, it can't be. If they lose power, they better go on with DA. Because DA is working with the outside forces that are controlling the economy of the country. That is the reason. Uma ngabe bantu bakithi nisolo ningaboni up to today ukuthi ama progressive like EFF, MK, ATM and others, if they do not unite, because isitha singaphakathi. The only thing, people who decide not to go to polls and vote, they are not even, uyazi indlela abenza ngakhona babulala ilizwe balibisela emuva because bathi ama-politicians angeke bawe, they are progressives in South Africa that can change everything bayibeke endaweni efanele. So with your vote uhleli ekhaya not voting for the progressive, you want to sit in poverty, ufuna kuhlala uhlukumezekile ulambile izwe lakho lingathuthuki. With your vote can make a big difference, because when you look at it, how in a KZN EDA yagijima yangafuni MK ukuthi with the highest vote, highest percentage in KZN, but decide ukuthi bahambe bayohlangana. They colluded with ANC and IFP because IFP is well known ukuthi isebenzisana ne-DA ilwa nabantu abamnyama. I-IFP ayizange seyike ilwele abantu abamnyama ukuthi baphumelele, ilwa nabo ibambisene namabhunu. Family, it's time ukuthi umuntu ongafuni ukuvota azi ukuthi le poverty ahlezi kuyo uzawuchubeka ahlale kuyo, because this thing of not voting, more especially when you vote for progressive political parties, you are voting for your freedom. How do you feel ukuhamba uvotele asesibheke ikhaya elisha sibuke lapha eduze neSandton ukuthi kwenzakalani lapho kuhlala abantu abamnyama khona? Why sinamalokishi siphinde sibe nama-suburbs sibe siyi-majority eSouth Africa? Bantu bakithi, wake up and smell the coffee. No professor law has said it all. This professor has said everything that you wanted to know. Ukuthi izwe lethu asikaziphatheli, siphathelwe. Family, just drop your comment according to what the professor has just said, yeah? Respectfully, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Ngithanda nonke ngothando lukalove. Ngithi bona bantu bakithi noma ngabe izindlu zodaka, let's fix i-country yethu. Noma izindlu zodaka kusekhaya. That is our home in South Africa. Bravo, bravo.